Good morning, everyone. Welcome back again. Here we are, episode 6. We are looking at setting limits and managing boundaries today. And we've had a struggle trying to put boundaries around our boundaries. Anyway, let's kind of get into it today. I've got the lovely Jennifer and Kirsty joining me. Jennifer's going to tic-tac with me. We're going to do a bit of ducking and weaving this morning, and Kirsty's going to help us with some questions at the end. So our client shared with me a great phrase today last week that really resonated with me. And he said, it's not working from home that's the issue, it's living at work that's the challenge. And that really resonated with me. And I guess one of the results I think we're going to find from this COVID experience is that many more people are going to be working from home. And the challenge will be, how do we manage within this always on culture, and how do we set those limits and manage those boundaries, which is what we're going to explore today. So, let's kind of look at, what a boundary actually is and how you can manage them, and, how values can support you with your boundaries as well. So, and we're also going to talk about some practical strategies about how you can really think about setting up some rituals that help you transition from work to home when you're working and homing at home all the time. Okay. So let's get started. We're going to come over to Jen. Jen's going to talk to us about what the hell are boundaries anyway. Over to you, Jen.
Thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone. And, I appreciate we probably all have a slightly different take on what boundaries are and how they work for us and so forth. But I thought I might just start with a broad definition from psychology so that we're all on the same page together, and then see where we go from there. So personal boundaries are the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships, essentially. So, a person with effective boundaries can say no to others when they want to, and they're also equally able to open themselves up to intimacy and close relationships. So one thing about boundaries is they're not static, they're dynamic, and there are different types of boundaries. And we might say a person who always keeps others at a distance, whether that's emotionally, physically, or otherwise, might be said to have overly rigid boundaries. And alternatively, someone who tends to get too involved with others we might say has porous boundaries. And I think a good example of an effective boundary that we could use would be to think about a cell wall, like in our bodies, a cell wall. Healthy cells let nourishment in and they send toxins out. So that's one kind of way to think about, well, what is an effective or healthy boundary? I've just had a wasp land on my notes. I think I have a boundary about that. Wasp, go away. So most people have a different mix of boundaries. So, you might have really effective boundaries at work. You could have porous boundaries in a romantic relationship, and you could have a whole mix of the different styles in your family life. And the appropriateness of boundaries depends on the context. So, what we share with our mates, we might not choose to share at work. And the other thing to keep in mind is that cultures can have different expectations of boundaries. So in some cultures, it would be seen as wildly inappropriate to be emotional, whereas other cultures might promote and encourage being emotional and sharing that way. So just a few things to keep in mind. Let's see. I think that's all I need to say right now, Anna. Let's start with that.
And I was thinking one of the things, Jen, that you and I talked about was sort of, a boundary can be around time. Like, how do you manage your boundaries around time? And that was kind of going to link me into thinking about, that time between work time and home time. So what might be some of those little rituals that you can create to separate the two when you're working and homing at home all the time? And I kind of had this flashback to my beautiful grandma, who's long since left us, unfortunately. But I realized that she was actually like a pioneer in this stuff, which is really quite phenomenal when you think about it. She was 86 when she died. And my grandma, she's lived in that era when you got married, you stopped working, shock horror. And so she became a domestic technician, and she was an amazing baker and a housekeeper and all sorts of things, and looked after all the family. And what she would do in the mornings, she would get up and she would have a little tweed skirt on and an apron, and she would go about the house doing all her chores, whether that was making meals or cleaning or laundry, whatever it might be that she was working on that day. And then at about sort of 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, she would disappear upstairs. And I guess I would notice this when she was staying with us. And she would disappear and she would come down transformed. So she would have washed her face and sort of done some makeup, a little bit of lipstick, changed her outfit. And then she was ready for the afternoon's activities, which might have been knitting, socializing, watching a bit of TV, like relaxation. So here was my grandma, all these years ago, creating this really nice boundary, this little ritual between work and home. And so I thought maybe we could all take a bit of a leaf out of her book and think about what are some of those little simple rituals that you can put into your day when you're working from home, to create that signal to yourself about I'm at home and now I'm at work, or vice versa. So it could be something simple like you decide, at the end of your work day, you go and do some exercise. You might go play a game with the kids. You might go and have a cup of tea, some afternoon tea to set up that signal and break the day for you. So just have a think about what might be some of those cool little rituals that you've got going on just now that you can create as a signal to you that it is, game over on the work front and it's now home. A friend of mine in London, he said on Friday nights, at the moment, he goes and puts his laptop in his spare room. There it is. It's gone for the weekend. He's now home for the weekend. So I'm going to continue on a slightly different track now, just around values. And I guess we're in this time of like a lot of ambiguity, we don't know when this is going to be over, what it's going to look like when it does. And so when things are really ambiguous, how can you have those effective boundaries? And one thing I'd encourage you to do is look to your values, so during a crisis, your values really rise to the surface. And for those of us who are working at home, maybe you're struggling with those family values, putting your family first and also being a really good worker and delivering to your boss too. How do you manage the two things? And I think of your values like a compass. They kind of show you the true north and what's really important. And when you come to that sort of decision, should I go right or left? Come back to your values. What's important to me right now? I need to talk, think about my family. And they can also sort of help you identify what you are or are not prepared to do. So probably some good reflection time needed to think about what's really important for you from a value sense, and then use them to help channel you in the right direction. So Jen, I'm going to switch back to you now. Give us your next little piece about saying no.
Yes, well, there we go. Linking to values. Yeah, I just wanted to say a little bit about saying no in this always on culture that we live in and the power of that. So I don't know if you're anything like me, I've had a tendency over the years to want to be everything to everyone. And I've had to really work with that and, want to demonstrate that I'm a team player and willing to make sacrifices. And yet there can be values clashes when that has a cost to my family, because I'm also a really committed mom. So I remember back in the late 90s when I was studying leadership development with my mentor, Richard Strozzi Heckler, whom I've mentioned before. He started one day talking about declines, or in other words, when we say no. And he said something that was earth-shattering to me at the time, and that was that no, or a decline, is a promise not to do something, and that's really valuable to the other person. And I always thought of no as a bad thing to say, in a sense, at work. And so that really opened me up to seeing it as a gift that frees up the other to get their need met elsewhere if I'm really not going to be able to do it. So if Anna comes to me and asks me, can you work on this report and I need it by the end of the day, but I also know that my son is doing remote learning right now and he's got a maths exam and he's really struggling with it, and I've already told him I'd help him with that. If I say yes to Anna because I can't say no, who am I going to let down? And I think that happens to us a lot, that in these circumstances, at least in the coaching calls that I've had and so forth, I see a theme where we tend to think that it has to be either or. I either have to please Anna or I have to please my son, or, and so I'm thinking back to the self-compassion exercise we did a few sessions back. And the last step of that is to think about what action we need to take. So sometimes we do need to say no, especially when we're talking about limits around time and working at home. And but the thing is that we can make a counter offer. We can open a conversation. We can use vulnerability-based trust to talk to our team member, our boss, or whoever it is, to find out, you know, is there something else? I can't do that, but I could do this, and by when, and all of those good conversations to have. And also as a leader, sometimes we have to say no for others, especially, you know, super parents that are around. So again, thinking back to working with Richard Strozzi Heckler, I remember when I was new, I was, you know, staying late at work because I was trying to get my head wrapped around it, everything, and do a good job and show I was a team player. And but our offices were on his ranch in California. He had a big property, and so he could see the light on in the office. And I remember after a week or so of this, I got this phone call from the house down to my desk, and he said, "Go home." So sometimes a leader does have to think about, have the conversation, say no for others. And one quick last thing. Sometimes we struggle to manage those boundaries, and looping back to Anna and values, a really good question to ask if we're struggling is, for the sake of what am I doing this? And that's the why question, having the purpose. And re-anchoring into the purpose helps us re-anchor into our values. And when we're working aligned with our values, we're going to produce much better work.
Nice finish, hey? The power of why. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. Why? So, and for the sake of what? So just ask yourself that question, you know, when you're kind of on that horns of a dilemma, for the sake of what am I about to make this decision? Love your comment, Alan. As leaders, should we be asking, what does it mean for you if I ask you to do this task? That is a great question, especially when you don't have full insight into what might be going home for people, on at home for people. So great question.
Yeah, because I think different people really do have different needs, and therefore different limits and boundaries in times of crises and times of great change. So I think that's a fantastic question, Alan.
I might come to a question from Jose, who said, I've found some silent moments awkward in virtual team meetings, and it's hard to judge the engagement of others when you cannot see people's faces. What are some ways of helping with this? It's a really good question. It seems simple, but it's quite tricky to manage. One thing I'd say is if you can encourage most people to have, well, all people to have video on, makes a huge difference. And my experience is that everybody video on or everybody video off, not a bit of each. Otherwise, it kind of feels like other people are spying on you for some bizarre reason. So video on is a really good way of doing it. And also what you'll find with the virtual meetings is that it takes a little bit of time. There's a tiny bit of lag, which you're not usually used to. So one of the things can be just to maybe count to like 1, 2, 3 in your head before you jump in, and just give people a little moment to answer. So that's a couple of simple things that you can do. Jen, any other thoughts that you might have on that one?
Yeah, Jose, I'm just thinking, if you're finding that's happening over and over again, then maybe naming it, and just naming that it's awkward to be working this way, and you know what you're noticing, and do team members have any, you know, thoughts about how it could be done slightly differently to be more effective. I'm just kind of trying to get a sense of what's going on for people.
Thank you so much for joining us again. We'll look forward to reading your feedback and letting you know what we're going to do next. And if you have anything else you'd like to share with us, please do email us at anna@peoplemastery.com. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you again soon. Have a great week.
Bye, everyone.